4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
A study released in May of 2014 conducted by GfK, Virin, a non-profit organization for the promotion of market research, found only 23% of Canadians trusted politicians, the least trusted professionals by far. So what are the expectations of the Canadian electorate? What do they want from the political ranks? Does trust demand that elected officials keep their campaign promises and follow the principles of the party platform? Or do Canadians expect elected officials to disregard campaign promises and party principles if they are in conflict with democratic values, and not in the best interest of the Canadian citizens and the country? Large percentages of the electorate that do not trust politicians show their apprehension by disengaging from the political process altogether. Their detachment from politics has lulled them into a false belief that parliamentary rule with all its complicated practices will take care of any attempt by radicals to take over the government. That assumption is easily formulated if you don't concern yourself with politics. When the winning party in the election proclaims the people have spoken and the party has been given a clear mandate, most Canadians accept that notion, and don't worry themselves with politics too much, until the next election. 77% of Canadians claim to not trust politicians, but voter apathy would imply there is a certain degree of trust in a democratically elected government, and the perceived egalitarian society. Stephen Joseph Harper, professional politician, the 22nd Prime Minister of Canada, and the first and only leader of the Conservative Party of Canada since its rebirth in 2003. Active in Canadian politics since 1985, Stephen Harper's political career began to unfold as an aide for Jim Hawkes, the progressive Conservative Member of Parliament for Calgary West, under the Mulroney government. But just 3 years later, Stephen Harper had become disillusioned with Brian Mulroney and the Progressive Conservative Party's fiscal policies, as well as the failure to fully implement the PC Party's version of a national energy program. Harper's conviction that the governing party should be aggressive in the pursuit of their primary political agenda was present early on in his political career. Even then it would appear he felt the centre-right PC Party's progressive principles, that mandated they adopted policies that appealed to a traditionally more liberal electorate, was too far to the left. That was not the course Stephen Harper intended to follow politically. He would later use that perception to attack the PC Party's policies in a bid to rally more militant conservatives to his cause. The PC Party was left of his social conservative ideals and libertarian economic beliefs. He renounced his PC Party affiliation and quit his position as aide for Jim Hawkes. Catching the eye of Reform Party boss Preston Manning, Harper became the chief policy officer and major player in drafting their 1988 election platform. Young Stephen Harper had found a group of like-minded conservative comrades nestled in the middle of Alberta who were willing to give him the opportunity to help shape a political party. Harper's first run for office was in the 1988 federal election, appearing on the ballot as Steve Harper for Calgary West. He lost by a wide margin to Hawkes, his former employer. Harper then became reformer Deborah Gray's executive assistant, chief advisor and speechwriter after she was elected as the party's first MP in a 1989 by-election. He held that position until 1993. Although some Canadians believe Stephen Harper is a native of Alberta, he was actually born in Toronto, Ontario in 1959 to a middle-class family. Growing up in your typical Canadian suburb in Ontario and attending public school, like millions of Canadians, Stephen Harper's middle-class upbringing was helped along by publicly financed programs in a socially progressive nation. In high school he was a member of the Richview Collegiate's team on Reach for the Top, a television quiz show for Canadian high school students, made possible by CBC. Swept up in the wave of Canadians moving west to take advantage of Alberta's black gold, in 1978 after only 2 months of university, Stephen Harper dropped out and left his home province of Ontario, headed west, and Alberta bound. Most of the people moving west were looking for the high-paying jobs on Alberta's drilling rigs, but Stephen Harper somehow found his way to Imperial Oil's mailroom in Edmonton. Stephen Harper then moved to Calgary, again enrolling in post-secondary studies, this time at the University of Calgary where he successfully earned a bachelor's degree in economics. He later returned to earn a master's degree, he completed in 1993 at the age of 34, while working for Reform Party MP, Deborah Gray. That same year, he was elected to the House of Commons as the Reform Party of Canada's Member of Parliament for Calgary West, beating out his old boss Jim Hawkes. Having never worked as an economist, his career in 1993 became that of a professional politician, that lasted for the next 4 years. In 1997 Stephen Harper stepped down as the Member of Parliament for Calgary West to become Vice President and later President of the National Citizens Coalition. The National Citizens Coalition is a Canadian think tank that claims to advocate for individual freedoms and accountable government. That same organization was involved with Stephen Harper's first win in 1993. In 1992 Harper had a falling out with Reform Party boss Preston Manning, due in part to Manning's willingness to compromise on party policies. Manning's favor had turned to a new policy advisor, Rick Anderson. Anderson's views were in opposition to Harper's ideological principles. Harper resigned as policy chief for the Reform Party in October 1992. But in 1993, out of favor with the Reform Party boss Preston Manning, Harper was still able to win a seat as the Reform Member of Parliament for Calgary West. A $50,000 print and television ad campaign by the National Citizens Coalition against Jim Hawkes could very well have helped Stephen Harper win his seat. Although the NCC never endorsed Harper, their media assault on Jim Hawkes was successful. Federal election laws restricting third-party advertising were pushed to their limits. Stephen Harper had demonstrated he was not willing to compromise on the reform ideology he had worked so hard to craft, but he was willing to use the Reform Party's toned-down, retooled platform revised by Rick Anderson to gain influence as a Member of Parliament. It must have become apparent to Stephen Harper when he gave up his seat in 1997 that the Reform Party would never form a government. Canadians saw them as nothing more than a regional party of social conservatives from Alberta. The National Citizens Coalition would be Stephen Harper's home for the next 5 years. Encouraged to run for the PC party leadership in 1998 he declined, arguing that it would burn bridges to those reformers with whom I worked for many years. The second coming of Stephen Harper's political career started in 2003, when he took over for Stockwell Day as the head of the Canadian Alliance, and returned to Parliament as leader of the opposition. The Progressive Conservative Party was on its deathbed. PC leader Peter Mackay, after promising not to merge with the Canadian Alliance, then agreed to merge the two parties to form the Conservative Party of Canada. The once defunct Conservative Party of Canada, which was rooted out of political existence in 1942, was born again, swallowing up the Reformers Alliance and the remnants of the PC Party, shifting away from the more centered compassionate conservative progressive beliefs, farther right, and more in line with the Alberta Reform Party's quasi-libertarian doctrine that Stephen Harper had a hand in fashioning. In March 2004, Stephen Harper was elected as the party's first non-interim leader. His vision of a unified Conservative Party had been realized. Control over the policies and direction of a united right was finally his. Now the shoe was on the other foot. As Stephen Harper moved up the political ladder, his many profound statements to the press about the importance of parliamentary rule brought him a lot of support.
It is the parliament that's supposed to run the country, not just the largest party and the single leader of that party. That's a criticism I've had, and that we've had, and that most Canadians have had for a long, long time now. So this is an opportunity to start to change that.
As co-author of the book entitled Our Benign Dictatorship, Harper argued that the Liberal Party only maintained power through a dysfunctional system and a divided opposition. Stephen Harper was correct in that assessment. Canada's first-past-the-post voting structure does not offer equality as its foundation in a multi-party system. Stephen Harper and his co-author Tom Flanagan called for electoral reforms, including proportional representation. If 30% of the electorate votes for a political party, then roughly 30% of the seats will be won by that party. Harper was only able to achieve his 166-seat majority win in 2011 because of the first-past-the-post voting structure. Proportional representation would have given the Conservatives 39% of the seats in Parliament. In 1997, after giving up his Reform Party seat for Calgary West, Stephen Harper seemed to be a man without a party. At some point he must have come to the realization that his participation at a party level was futile. His non-compromising political philosophy did not fit in with the current conservative political parties or their leadership. In the Canadian political arena in 1997, there was no place for Stephen Harper. Between the Reformers, the PC Party, and the Quebec Nationalists, there was no chance a Conservative Party could ever form a majority government. Not until the Conservative right was united again under one banner, as Harper and Flanagan had called for. From 1997 to 2002, Stephen Harper began to formulate his grand design for Canada. Using his position at the NCC, Harper launched an unsuccessful legal battle against federal election laws restricting third-party advertising. Then Harper led the NCC in several campaigns against the Canadian Wheat Board. In 1997, Harper delivered a speech on Canadian identity to the conservative American think tank called the Council for National Policy. The CNP was founded in 1981 by fundamentalist Baptist pastor Tim Leahy, author of the Left Behind series of books affiliated with the belief in the rapture. The Nation magazine has described the CNP as a secretive organization that networks wealthy right-wing donors together with top conservative operatives to plan long-term movement strategy.
Canada is a Northern European welfare state in the worst sense of the term, and very proud of it. If you're like all Americans, you know almost nothing except for your own country, which makes you probably knowledgeable about one more country than most Canadians.
Harper claimed the comments were in jest, but most Canadians would take offense to that commentary. In 1997, 14% of Canada's population were below the low-income cutoff. 2 years into a Liberal government, it was finally starting to come back down after hitting almost 16%, driven up by Brian Mulroney's Conservative government. The Liberals, elected in 1994, were able to bring the amount of people living below the low-income cutoff back down to 11.5% by 2001. But Stephen Harper was to some extent correct when he said Canada is a Northern European welfare state in the worst sense of the term. The Northern European welfare states are much better at reducing poverty. They have a narrower income gap, a happier middle class with a higher standard of living. In fact, Canada is just slightly better than the United States at being a Northern European welfare state. The Conference Board of Canada does its own relative measure of quality of life in Canada and its peer countries, and summarized a 2013 report on working-age poverty by the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. From the Conference Board of Canada's website.
Canada earns a D grade, and ranks 15th among 17 countries. More than 1 in 10 Canadians between the ages of 18 and 65 live in poverty. The poverty rate among working-age people in Canada increased significantly between the mid-1990s and the mid-2000s. More than 11% of working-age Canadians live in relative poverty. The relationship between social spending and poverty rates has become more obvious over time. So it is no surprise that the leading countries boast strong traditions of wealth distribution. The success of the top countries in maintaining low poverty rates is attributed to a universal welfare policy that has been effectively combined with job creation strategies that support gender equality and accessibility.
Measuring poverty is a mixed bag of theories based on any number of variables determined by whoever is conducting the study. Whether to use an absolute or relative measure is a major point of contention. An absolute measure, or the basic needs measure, takes a bread and water approach to poverty and may be a good indicator in the developing world, but not suitable in Western nations. A relative measure of poverty includes the issues of social exclusion and inequality. It has been demonstrated that maintaining a minimum of social equality with the help of the social safety net stops the further slip into poverty. Frustrated by conflicting results, agreeing on some kind of reliable measure to help in developing program strategies and measuring program outcomes is extremely difficult if not impossible. Different government departments, charities, think tanks, statisticians and a host of other special interest groups have come up with their own measures and conclusions. Human Resources and Skills Development Canada has developed a basic needs market basket measure, a measure of low income based on the cost of a specified basket of goods and services representing a modest, basic standard of living. The 2006 market basket measure indicated 10% of Canadians lived below the minimum requirement. The last survey in 2009 indicated a 0.5% increase to 10.5%. The Low Income Cutoff is an income inequality measure published by Statistics Canada. Statistics Canada says it's not a poverty rate but it is an indicator on how well Canadians are doing. The low income inequality measure was 10.8% as of 2005 and 9% in 2009. The Fraser Institute, a conservative think tank, alleges that the Canadian government exaggerates poverty rates and publishes their own basic needs poverty measure. Christopher Zalo's measure has been described as a stingy basic needs budget. The think tank claims poverty has declined significantly over the past 60 years and was 4.9% as of 2004, with a 7% reduction happening in the post-Keynesian era. The Institute's measure would seem to testify to the effectiveness of the first 30 years of free market capitalism to pull people out of poverty. But was that measure reliable? The Low Income Cutoff, published by Statistics Canada in 2005, indicates only a 2% overall drop in Canadians below the low income cutoff for the previous 20-year period. The Fraser Institute claims a 4% drop in poverty for the same time period. Although different measures are used and some will claim they can't be compared, they are indicators that show how Canadians are doing. The Fraser Institute's numbers are 50% lower than the other indicator. The wide gap in what are perceived to be competing measures does make one question the motives of past governments when churning out statistics. But taking into account the Human Resources and Skills Development Canada's 2006 basic needs measure of 10%, the Fraser measure appears to underestimate poverty in Canada by 50%. If we apply an indicator showing the governing parties during the same time period, it reveals three interesting facts. In a period of 7 years, from 1987 to late 1994, the Conservative government under Brian Mulroney put 5% more of the Canadian population below the low income cutoff, pushing it up to 15% according to Statistics Canada. But if you observe the Fraser measure closely, it trends with the low income cutoff until the Mulroney era. At that point, the Fraser Institute's basic needs poverty measure appears to stall for 6 years, only moves up slightly, while Statistics Canada's measure of the low income cutoff goes through the roof. Those three indicators combined would make it appear the Fraser Institute's favoritism toward conservative governments shows through in their studies. Who should Canadians trust, the Government of Canada or the conservative-backed Fraser Institute? The think tank's measure is 50% lower. Tossing in some exotic measure into the public domain to call into question every other measure appears to be an attempt to confuse the issue. The Fraser Institute's accusation that the government, the Liberals, were keeping the numbers high suggests the political leaders have influence over the statistics. That very well could be possible. In 2010, a historical revision of the 2006 to 2009 Survey of Labor and Income Dynamics was made by the Harper government based on the 2006 census, instead of the 2001 census data, and a few adjustments on how the figures are calculated. The low-income cutoff in 2009 was adjusted to 9%. The Human Resources and Skills Development Canada's 2009 Basic Needs Measure, independent of the historical revision, was up half a percentage point to 10.5%. The numbers indicate more people can't meet their basic needs, and fewer people are below the low-income cutoff.